11th marked the second anniversary of the catastrophic nuclear disaster at the Fukushima Diichi nuclear power station in Japan. Within a week of the mega earthquake and tsunami, 3 U.S.-designed nuclear reactors had blown up and melted down. Thousands of tons of nuclear fuel was left standing, overheating. Radiation spewed out into the area and into the Pacific Ocean. And over 160,000 people have been, to this day, permanently out of their homes. And finally, the cleanup is estimated to cost at least $250 billion. 2 years later, not much has changed. Today's guest was so moved by the magnitude of the disaster that she wrote a book about it. So please welcome tonight into your homes the author of Devil's Tango, How I Learned the Fukushima Step by Step, Cecile Pineda. Thank you very much for coming today.
Well, thank you, Dave. I'm glad to be here.
Good. So you are on tour. How's it feel to be a rock star?
Not quite. Not
Okay.
quite. No, that's the dog's legs banjo, right?
So you're out talking about the nuclear disaster in Fukushima. Where have you been so far?
Oh my goodness, you know, I almost don't remember. I started at Ann Arbor. I've been in Ohio. I've been to Toledo. I've been to Bowling Green. I've been, I came today from Lansing and all in between.
Mm-hmm. And you're heading out from Chicago to other parts.
Yes, I'm heading out tomorrow to Madison and parts west.
Now this book, The Devil's Tango, is this your first effort in nonfiction? Because prior to this you've had
no, I like to serve apprenticeships. And so in 2009 I heard of a Jewish lady who was working in the jails in Paterson, New Jersey, aiding immigrants that have been swept up by ice in conditions that were absolutely appalling. And I'm very much interested in that issue, so I took a plane to New Jersey and I interviewed her, and I developed an article, a 32-page article, which nobody would take because, of course, it was entirely too long, but it's a very complex subject. And so it has been published on a blog on La Bloga. So if your listeners look at La Bloga and they Google my name, or rather they put in my name, the article will pop up.
Mm-hmm. So you've had other experiences with other arts as well, not just writing?
Yes, yes. I have shed a life every 12 years. And so previous artistic life was I founded and directed a collaborative theater company doing collective creation.
Mm-hmm. So along comes March 11th, 2011, and the reactors blow up at Fukushima and something dramatically changes. And what I want to get to is, it's not just that you picked up the idea of doing a nonfiction book, but the way you did it. I'd like you to talk a little bit about why you selected the way you did the book. So,
well, I'm going to tell your listeners the truth. I'm a lazy writer, and I like to write in crotts. And as a matter of fact, quite a few of my works of fiction are structured that way. It has many advantages. One of them is that you can control the narrative, and you get to splice things together as you wish, like a crazy quilt. But in fact, your listeners who read this book will see that what they see is what they got, what I got, because it is sequential in terms of the day-by-day reportage of what's going on.
Yeah, it really struck me as a cross between a diary, which it was in many instances,
it's a journal.
Your own personal experiences and how it affected you, and putting in some very astounding fact-finding from what was going on in the media at the time.
Yeah, I consider it a journal, a day-to-day. And by the way, today is the 735th day following the disaster at Fukushima Diichi, which is ongoing. We cannot stress that enough, that if anything, it's worse than ever.
So along came that day. What did that disaster represent to you? You're not exactly a neophyte in the political sphere, so why was this special somehow?
Well, I understood. I'm not a physicist, but I understood right away that this would be polluting the air and the seas and the soils and our food, that it would enter the food chain. I understood that there was absolutely no way that a disaster of this magnitude would not impact the entire planet. And in fact, the plume has wrapped itself around the northern hemisphere and continues to do so. And now it's in the southern hemisphere as well.
Just like the Chernobyl disaster in '86.
Yes, only at least. They say this is 10 times worse. I don't believe that for a moment. I think this is infinitely worse.
Mm-hmm.
I do.
So your aim at writing the book is what?
What I would like to see, first of all, is consciousness. I would like to see that people who inhabit the planet become cognizant of what is going on and what is being taken away from us by corporations. That is the prime objective. And having been cognizant of that they begin to engage. That's the whole point. It is to engage. It is to find the way that you can engage, that you can support an anti-nuclear movement, that you can devote whatever small or large talents you have. It doesn't matter. Everything counts. And that we attempt to reverse the consciousness of humanity, because for the most part, people tend to be either in denial or completely oblivious.
Now, how long would you say you've been politically active? This is not everybody's cup of tea, but...
I had a superb education. I was educated by Dominican nuns, and they were extremely aware, and they had a very deeply ingrained sense of social justice. And I benefited from that education. And I'll tell you something else very particular about these women. They encouraged critical thinking. Imagine that. We didn't test, we thought. So, you know, that has stayed with me, and I have to say that that stands out above all the other education that I have had and benefited from. It's that formation.
It's interesting you mentioned that. I also, in grade school, was taught by nuns, and that particular order is still to this day doing a lot of active social work, and I find that the religious female clergy of the Catholic Church is probably one of the high watermarks and saving graces of that institution. Personal comment, but it seems
Absolutely.
like we've had a similar experience with our...
I couldn't agree with you more.
Mm-hmm. So, where people are at now on this idea, you know, our news consciousness is so short. And I'm glad you brought up this as the 700th and 35th day, because news usually ends in about 3 or 5 days. For many people who are watching this show, they may not even recognize the word Fukushima or Fukushima, however you pronounce it. They don't even know what it was. I've had experiences where kids don't even know what 3 Mile Island is. Absolutely. They've never heard of Chernobyl. So, you know, what do we do to bring people up to steam on this? How do you address that?
There are so many ways, just in terms of strategy. You know, I can't pretend that I hold the human race in high regard.
You and Mark Twain.
I hesitate to say, but people will always obey their self-interest. So that is, I think, what we have to aim for. I don't think that creating fear and anxiety is at all an appropriate way to go, because fundamentally, it seems to me, we are having a love affair with democracy. We had a constitution, and we desperately love the idea of democracy. We do not like hierarchical thinking. We like collaborative thinking. We love to feel that we own a piece, that we have a voice. So I think that one of the ways to really awaken people and to bring out their sense of joy is to reaffirm that, yes, they have a voice, and there are people that want to hear it, and they need to be heard, that everything that they can contribute to the awareness of what goes on in this planet is, if you like, an act of grace. Nothing is lost, I think, in the cosmic soup. The least act is not lost. And once people are aware, then they have to understand that here in the Great Lakes alone, you have 5 GE Mark I boiling water reactors, exactly the same model as those that exploded, of containment failure at Fukushima Daiichi.
And I would mention that 4 of those are in Illinois. We have 2 southwest of Chicago at the Dresden station, and then there are 2 more on the Mississippi River at the Quad Cities station, which are older than the actual ones that blew up and melted down in Japan.
Right, and you have Fermi 2, and you have Monticello. Additionally, of course, you have Davis-Besse. So it seems to me that we begin there. And then the question is, if the GE Mark I exploded, what are the chances of the others exploding and contaminating our soils and our landscape and our food? You know, in California, we have 2 reactors. They're not GE Mark I's, but they are deposited directly over earthquake faults. And I might add for your listeners, but I'm sure they know, that Japan essentially is a seismically active zone. There are parts of Japan that were under the ocean 5,000 years ago.
And let's pause on that one, because I'm not sure what our audience knows at this point, so I want to come back and say, and just raise it. How familiar are you with the current situation in Japan? Have you been there recently or talked to people there?
No, people ask me, oh, you went to Japan? No, I went to my computer. All of this information is available if you dig for it. You just have to know where. And the book has a 3-page book bibliography, and equally every article that is cited is referenced in the appendix. So what is going on? I have basically been able to unearth a lot, but more to the point, in California, we had the visit of an elderly Japanese engineer, Yastel Yamada. Yastel Yamada heads up an organization called Skill Veterans for Fukushima. And the program of his group, he has 400 elderly engineers and some people who are versed as well, not only in industrial process, but also in nuclear process. And their program is to volunteer at the site, which is, of course, managed right now by a utility, not a remediating entity, a utility, which has no expertise whatsoever in remediation, particularly of an accident of this magnitude. So Mr. Yamada has been on site, and I have seen his PowerPoint, and his program is that these 400 elderly gentlemen are proposing to replace the young ones who are doing the worst and most dangerous work at Fukushima. So I'll just describe what I've seen in terms of the photographs that he's taken when he was on site. First of all, your listeners, I'm sure, know what PVC is, plastic pipe, and because you live in a very cold area of the country, you know that you have freezes, and you know the PVC does not behave well when there are freezes. It tends to crack. And repeatedly, we hear over and over that there are yet more leaks at Fukushima Daiichi. And it could very well be because all of the piping is being replaced with PVC, including in the drainage ditches as well. And I've seen pictures of that. As well, now TEPCO is very concerned about tsunamis. And so they do not have a seawall, but they have decided that it would be a very good thing to have a seawall. But they do not have the means of creating one because that site now is extremely hot to work in. And so they've created a temporary seawall. The temporary seawall looks to me like very large garbage bags filled with detritus. They're translucent, so you can see what's inside. It looks to me like it's lightweight styrofoam. But in any case, you have 3 courses of these big sausages. So I'm guesstimating on the basis of what I'm looking at, that I'm looking at anywhere from 6 feet to 9 feet of essentially piled up sausages. And we know the power of water and the force of nature. And we know that with a serious surge, the sea will just move in and swoosh it right back out to the Pacific Gyre, and that'll be that.
That's certainly been demonstrated already
Yeah.
2 years ago. We were lucky to have Mr. Yamada here as well in August of 2012 for the Hiroshima and Nagasaki Day observances that we had. And I just want to underscore one thing about what he said. What you're describing, I don't know how it comes across to our listeners, this notion of, so we asked him, well, why would people do this? Because it really seemed very foreign to our culture here. And he said, the men we've talked to and women we've talked to feel a deep sense of regret for what they have done to their country. Now, these are the engineers who built that industry and saw its result when the genie gets out of the bottle. So the first is a sense of regret and a sense that they have to atone. They owe the country something back, and they are willing to do that to preserve the young people. Did you talk about
I am
that?
sure that is the case. That is very much in the Japanese character. There is a sense of obligation and a mutuality. But I can tell you that people in high places in Japan are no different from the people here in high places. And, well, I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine. And that's the way it works. So, for example, the present Prime Minister Abe, declared that Japan would be nuclear-free by 2030 in response, I think, to popular resistance. 70% of the people in Japan do not want those reactors. Notwithstanding, 2 reactors have already been started at Ohi, at the OE plant. Within a week, Mr. Abe reversed his position 100%. Why? Because the United States saw fit to give Japan an early missile warning system. The United States requires the Japanese nuclear industry to maintain its own nuclear industry, and the reason for that is that the United States has been singularly unsuccessful in developing both breeder technology
which Japan has,
and reprocessing technology. There are 2 plants in Japan, Manju, which is a fast breeder. I think it's operated for 1 day. The United States feels very proprietary, however, because it shared its technology with Japan. And that's why the United States feels proprietary about Manju, which, by the way, is located just a few kilometers south of Fukushima Diichi. The other plant is a reprocessor, and it's called Rakasho. It sits directly over an earthquake fault, and it has been called the dirtiest factory in the world.
Now, when you say reprocessor, what exactly does that mean, so people distinguish that?
All of the nuclear detritus, liquid and solid, is shipped to Rakasho for reprocessing, where elements such as uranium are extracted. So, in other words, the useful stuff is separated from the nuclear waste.
And there's still waste left over after that.
Oh, goodness. It does not go away. And that's something that I've been speaking about to all of my audiences, reminding all of us that the engineers who design these things do not keep planetary systems or Earth systems in mind. The Earth is designed in such a way that it recycles everything. And the waste even that animals give off can be used by other forms of life. So that's number one. The other thing is, of course, global warming. And we're now at 390 parts per minute, whereas stable would be 350 parts. And we have not designed these plants to accept that eventuality. And it's extremely perilous to nuclear plants. Why? Because with Arctic melt, great vast quantities of water are being released into the oceans, and the loads of the water is being redistributed on the seabed. And as a result, in the Ring of Fire, you have now repeated incidents of mega quakes. You had in Sumatra, in Chile, in the Tohoku quake at Fukushima Diichi. And that is a direct consequence of global warming.
We're going to switch gears a minute now with the time remaining, because you touched on something I think is important. First, I want to give you a little background. In December of 2012, we hosted here in Chicago a conference called A Mountain of Waste 70 Years High, Ending the Nuclear Age. And we did it deliberately on December 2nd, which was the 70th anniversary of the first Enrico Fermi chain reaction, and we did it right where it happened. But what was different about that, and where we're heading now, was a colleague of mine, a good friend, Norma Field, Dr. Norma Field of University of Chicago, Professor Emeritus, Department of East Asian Studies. For 2 years, we had been attending industry conferences and updates from Argonne National Laboratory and everyone who was in the know on nuclear. And all we kept hearing about were RADs, REMs, earthquakes, structural this, that. And at the end of every session, she would be frantically pulling her hair out saying, "Where are the people? You've talked for an hour, you haven't mentioned the people once." So I want to come to the people in two senses here in our closing minutes. The first was, do you have any familiarity with the Japanese anti-nuclear resistance? And I bring it up because I think the stereotype here in this country of Japanese are either they're very nice, demure, quiet, geisha type people, or they're deadly ninja samurais who chop everything apart. And I think there's something in between there. Most people don't see the Japanese as being in the streets demonstrating, but that's not true, is it?
The ninjas are fiction. Yes, the Japanese are very respectful, obedient, and very, very trusting of authority. Yet, every Friday night, 100,000 uppity Japanese,
how many?
100,000 Japanese take to the streets protesting every Friday night. And in San Francisco, we do a sympathetic demonstration on the 11th of every month. And by the way, that's being live streamed now to the people of Japan. The people of Japan are suffering immensely. Not only that, but their media is as opaque as ours. This is a non-issue. So they are very frightened, particularly the people in Fukushima. Fukushima is one of the most gorgeous areas of the country, and largely it is inhabited by farmers, by peasants, and by people who have gone specifically to Fukushima to start organic farms. Several of the people who have started organic farms have committed suicide because they have lost their land in all perpetuity. The Japanese government is saying, "Oh, no, it's not a problem. No, we'll just rake up the soil, we'll put it in bags, we'll bury it, and you'll be able to go right back." They are demanding that people to whom they evacuated and to whom they gave compensation repay the money. They have asked, for example, a restaurant keeper in the contaminated zone to go back and restart his restaurant. Can you imagine how many clients he's going to have who want to eat radioactive sandwiches? I don't think so.
All right, in the few minutes we have left, there are two topics I want to get to because I think they're important. I've read your book, and we talked about this prior, but I guess the main question that comes, and you have to go to the very last page of your book, is there hope that we're going to turn this around and solve these problems? And if so, what kind of hope?
I believe that hope is the greatest enemy because it's like seduction. It's very titillating at first, but it tends to peter out. I offer something else, or at least for myself. I think that there is no other appropriate response for despair, for the fact that we are now beyond our own technology to solve our own technology. And that is engagement. I feel people have to engage, and I think they have to do it on three levels. On the personal level, I think that they have to re-examine their relations to one another and to recognize the divine in every human being and every living creature. So that's the private level. On the public level, I think that we have to organize. I think that we not only have to work together to shut down these plants and to put an end to the depredations of the nuclear industry as well as its weapons-making side. But at the same time, we have to make common cause with other people whose work is directly connected. And I'm talking about environmentalists, I'm talking about peace advocates, because all of this has to do with wars for resources. All of these issues are connected, and in particular, I think the anti-nuclear issue is connected to the no drones issue. They are now talking about arming drones with nuclear weapons. That's the second level. And the third level, wherever I talk, I say the third level starts with your index finger. And what you do is you go and you find a wall. And on that wall, you find a switch. And then you go like this, and it reads off. You use less, you power down, and you investigate how you can support the movement for alternatives, whether it's solar, wind, cogeneration, energy conservation. There are so many ways. I've just left the state of Michigan. It's a good example. With economic collapse, the demand for power in the state of Michigan over the past 10 years has been reduced 16%. We don't need those reactors, and even without those reactors, we would still have too much power in the state of Michigan.
Now we're going to be winding up in a minute here, and I have a thought experiment I want you to bring us into the closing with. You're stuck in what we call it Willis Tower now. It used to be the Sears Tower, top floor, and you're ready to go down, and who walks in but Prime Minister Shinzo Abe? And it's only the two of you from the top floor down. What do you say to him on the way down?
David, I have to disappoint you. Supposing I'm in the Sears Tower and in walks Barack Hussein Obama, what do you think I would say to him? You see, there is no possibility of saying anything to the people who make decisions for us as long as we don't have democracy. These people are completely surrounded by their handlers, by all the people, the rings and rings of functionaries that surround them, that play the same game, and that have drunk the Kool-Aid. They are all in the same system together, feeding off one another. They are inaccessible. I don't know what I would say to Prime Minister Abe. I don't speak his language. I do meet the Vice Consul of Japan in San Francisco every month, and I can tell you what it's like. It's a minuet. We speak to him in Japanese. We bow. He listens in Japanese. He bows. Then he takes the microphone and he speaks a few words in Japanese. Then everybody bows. But the Vice Consul, I know, is a man of tremendous feeling because we visited him in April of 2011. And we spoke our piece. We presented him with 5,000 signatures to prevent the Japanese government from okaying the incineration of nuclear waste. And at the end of it, when it was his turn to speak, he couldn't because his face was wet.
Well, we're going to have to stop on that image, and I really appreciate you coming to share your stories from the book, and I wish you good luck on the rest of the tour.
Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you. I'd like to thank our guest, Cecile Pineda, for coming today. You've been watching CAN TV Community Forum, a community service of CAN TV. I'm Dave Kraft, and I thank you for joining us this evening. All right.